The desert night feels endless, the kind that hums softly, like a living thing, breathing with you. The fire before me has burned low, its light trembling against the sand, shaping the shadows of the rocks into quiet spirits. I sit with my blanket drawn around my shoulders, listening to the small crackle of wood. Above me, the stars are not just stars. They are eyes, stories, the quiet witnesses of all who walked this land before I was born. And tonight, beneath that unblinking sky, I tell you a story about someone who has never truly gone away. They call him Coyote. I smile when I say the name, because even now, after so many years of listening to the old ones, I still can't decide whether to laugh or shake my head when I think of him. Coyote, the fool who saved the world, the trickster who lies, cheats, dances, and somehow still finds truth at the end of his mistakes. He's not just a creature, not just a myth. He's a reflection, the one who stumbles through life, so that the rest of us might see ourselves a little more clearly. When I was younger, I thought stories like this were only meant for children. I remember sitting near the fire, eyes half closed, listening to my grandmother's voice rise and fall like the wind between canyons. Long ago, she would say, before humans were clever and before the stars had their places, there was Coyote. Then she would pause, letting silence drift over us. That silence was part of the story. 2, the heartbeat of the land. Out here, silence isn't empty. It carries weight. It carries memory. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the soft feet of those who came before. Women gathering herbs under the moonlight, men whispering prayers of mountain, children laughing as they chase fireflies between the rocks. And somewhere among them, always just out of sight, is Coyote, watching, grinning, waiting to make his next mistake. I poke the embers with a stick and watch sparks rise into the cool air. The scent of juniper and sage burns with a sweetness that feels ancient. The desert smells like history here, like dust, smoke, and time. Every tribe tells the story of Coyote differently. Some say he was there at the beginning of the world, when animals spoke and the rivers still had voices. Others say he wandered in after creation, too restless to belong anywhere. The Navajo speak of him as the one who could not stop meddling. The Nez Perce call him the teacher who never learned. The Utes say he once threw the stars into the sky in a single impatient toss, and that's why they still shimmer scattered and wild. I have heard elders tell his stories with laughter that shakes their shoulders, and others tell them with a slow sadness in their eyes. Because Coyote isn't only mischief, he's consequence. He's a reminder that wisdom and foolishness are neighbors sharing the same fire. Sometimes when I look at the world now, the glass towers, the restless crowds, the glowing screens, I think maybe Coyote just changed his fur. Maybe he walks among us, still playing tricks, still teaching us a hard way. Maybe every time we ignore a warning or take too much or laugh at another's pain, he grins that sly grin because he knows we're repeating his oldest lessons. The fire crackles, breaking the thought. Somewhere far out in the darkness, a night bird calls. It's a lonely sound, but it doesn't frighten me. It belongs here. Everything does. There's an old belief that stories are alive. They move like rivers, shifting, carrying bits of truth from one shore to another. They belong to no one and everyone. The storyteller is just a momentary keeper, holding it like water cupped in their hands before letting it flow on. That's how it was for my grandmother, and for hers before her. When I speak of Coyote now, I feel that same flow, that same gentle current of breath and time. My voice joins all the others who have ever spoken his name. Sometimes I imagine Coyote sitting just beyond the firelight as I talk. Maybe his ears twitch at his own name. Maybe he smirks, flattered and annoyed in equal measure. He's clever enough to hide his tracks, but foolish enough to stay close to the warmth of his own story. I like to think he listens just to see if I'll get it right, or if I'll twist it like he did. The wind picks up. It moves across the sand in long sighs, brushing against my face like invisible fingers. The moon is thin tonight, a silver sliver caught in the ribs of the sky. Every shape in the distance, rock, cactus, or shadow, seems alive. The desert has its own language, slow and patient. It doesn't rush to reveal meaning. It waits for you to quiet yourself enough to understand. I take a deep breath, and the air is cool in my lungs. Out here, even breathing feels sacred. You can almost believe that every breath connects you to the breath of the earth itself. It is in this stillness that Coyote's stories live best. Because his lessons aren't grand or shouted from mountains. They're whispered in mistakes, in laughter, in the way dawn always follows night. He is every rash decision that somehow turns into wisdom. Every clumsy attempt that ends in a revelation. And perhaps that's why his story never ends. Because neither do ours. Once, when I asked my grandmother why Coyote was allowed to cause so much trouble, she laughed softly and said, "Because he reminds us that perfection is lonely. Without the fool, there's no learning. Without the shadow, no light." At the time, I didn't understand. But now, sitting beneath these stars, I think I do. Maybe that's what keeps people telling his tales. Not to mock him, but to thank him. To remember that every stumble can lead to insight. That even the trickster serves the world in his own backward way. The fire sighs again, a long glowing breath. I feed it one more piece of wood. The flames climb gently, painting the nearby stones in amber light. The night hums. Somewhere in that hum, if you listen with your heart instead of your ears, you might hear him, laughing, running, changing shape as he always has. Every tribe has a coyote, but which one lives in you? Maybe he's the part of you that questions everything, or the one that wants to test the rules, just to see if the world still bends. Maybe he's the part that stumbles, learns, forgives, and tries again. And if you've ever fallen, only to rise wiser and softer, perhaps Coyote has already paid you a visit. I smile again, pulling the blanket tighter as the fire burns lower. The wind is colder now, the stars closer, and the desert feels like it's listening. So I keep my voice low, gentle, almost a whisper, as if telling the earth itself. Tonight, we remember you, old friend, the one who never dies, but always learns the hard way. It's strange, isn't it, how a single name can carry 1,000 faces. When I speak of Coyote, I don't mean just one creature, not one tale, not one voice, not even one story. He is a traveler made of stories themselves, changing shape as easily as sand shifts in the wind. From one valley to the next, from one campfire to another, his footsteps scatter across centuries. The Navajo called him Ai, sacred and foolish all at once. The Ute had their own name for him, sharp with laughter and warning. To the Plains tribes, he was a creator and a clown, sometimes both in the same breath. I have heard that among the Chinook, he was a hero who tamed the monsters that once devoured the world. Among the Crow, he was a reckless uncle who couldn't keep out of trouble. And yet, despite all these forms, the soul of him never changed. He was always curious, always hungry, always walking the thin line between light and shadow. It said that when the first people began to wander this land, they didn't carry books or scrolls. They carried songs and stories, folded into their memory like sacred cloth. These stories were living things meant to be spoken, to be breathed into the night air. Each time someone told them, they changed a little, a different rhythm, a new ending, a twist added by the storyteller's mood or the way the wind sounded that night. That's how Coyote grew, not from paper, but from breath. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can almost see how it happened. A grandmother sits near the fire, her hands rough from gathering wood, her voice soft and steady as she speaks. Around her, children lean in, eyes wide, the flames reflected in their faces. The desert outside is cold, but the circle is warm. She tells them how Coyote once tried to steal the moon, or how he tricked the mountain lions, or how he made the rivers flow the wrong way just to see what would happen. And when she finishes, she laughs, not because it's funny, but because the story feels alive again. A few hundred miles away, another woman tells the same story, but her coyote wears a different mask. The mountains around her are taller, the air thinner, the language older. Her voice carries over the snow instead of sand, and her laughter sounds different too, softer, maybe sadder. But still, the same coyote runs through her words. That's the magic of oral tradition. It bends and breathes like a reed in the wind. No one owns it, and yet everyone belongs to it. Each tribe, each family, added a little piece of their life into the stories. Some gave him a mate, some gave him enemies, some gave him lessons to learn over and over. It makes me think about how humans understand truth. We often believe truth must be solid, carved in stone, unchanging. But maybe truth, like Coyote, moves. Maybe it shifts shape so it can fit inside every heart that listens. When I was a child, I remember asking my grandmother if all these coyotes, from the deserts, the plains, the forests, were the same one. She just smiled, eyes crinkled by firelight, and said, "If they weren't, why do they all laugh the same?" That answer stayed with me. Laughter, not wisdom, not strength, was a thread that stitched every version of him together. Because laughter, too, is sacred. There's a certain kind of laughter you hear when people tell old stories. It's not loud or mocking. It's the laughter of survival, of people who have seen hard seasons, lost much, and still find joy in the remembering. It's the sound of resilience, a reminder that the heart can stay light even when the world is heavy. Think about it. What happens when you laugh? For a moment, pain loosens its grip, worry steps aside, the breath moves freely again. That's what these stories did. They weren't only entertainment. They were medicine, a way to keep the spirit warm in the coldest months, a way to teach without scolding, to heal without preaching. I often wonder if that's why Coyote was allowed to make so many mistakes. Because through him, people could laugh at their own, safely, kindly, without shame. The elders could tell a story of foolishness and still end it with a smile. Children could learn caution through comedy, and adults would forgive themselves for being human. Coyote's mischief was a reflection, not a crime. Out here in the open desert, the night listens closely when his name is spoken. The wind moves differently, like an old friend turning its head. I imagine those first storytellers, thousands of years ago, sitting under the same sky, watching the same stars. The constellations were their library. The earth itself was their book. And in that vast silence, the only thing that could travel farther than a man's footsteps was his laughter. Some say Coyote still travels that way, carrying the wind and the echo of a joke told by firelight in the sigh of the mountains at dusk. Perhaps that's why, even now, people find him familiar, even if they've never heard his name before. He's the restless voice inside every human being that says, "What if? What if I try? What if I fail? What if I laugh anyway?" I once asked an elder from the Hopi Nation about their stories of Coyote. He smiled and said, "We listen to him not because he's wise, but because he's honest." That stayed with me. Honesty, not perfection, is what makes his stories worth telling. When you listen to enough Coyote tales, you start to see a pattern. He's clever, but not cruel. He's reckless, but rarely evil. He pushes boundaries not out of malice, but because he wants to understand. And in that desire to understand, he mirrors the oldest curiosity in the world, the one that built fires, crossed rivers, and shaped dreams. It's easy to think of myths as distant things, trapped in time, but I believe they never stop happening. Each generation adds a new verse to the same song. Each laugh, each lesson, each foolish hope, it all belongs to the same melody. And maybe that's why Coyote still lives, not in the desert alone, but in every heart that dares to laugh while learning, in every mistake that turns into understanding, in every story that travels from one voice to another. The fire beside me has burned low again. The smoke rises in gentle ribbons, carrying whispers into the sky. I watch it disappear and think about all those storytellers before me, women, men, children, who once sat as I do now, giving shape to their world through words. If laughter is our teacher, then perhaps Coyote is the oldest professor alive. And as I speak his name into the quiet air, I can almost hear him chuckle, proud and mischievous, from somewhere just beyond the stars. If this story makes you smile, share it with someone who needs a little mischief tonight. When the world was still young, before the people had warmth or light, the night stretched long and cold. The earth was quiet then, too quiet, and every creature huddled together in darkness, whispering their breath into the frozen air. The rivers were silent under sheets of ice, and even the stars seemed far away, watching from a sky that offered no comfort. The fire spirits kept their flame hidden on the highest mountain, guarded by sharp rocks and cruel winds. They said fire was not meant for mortals, that humans were too foolish, too forgetful, too greedy to hold something so sacred. And maybe they were right. But Coyote, as always, had other thoughts. He had watched the people shiver in their huts, wrapping themselves in bark and leaves, huddle close, teeth chattering through endless nights. He watched mothers hold their children tight, watched old men grow stiff and cold before morning. Coyote laughed at many things, but not at this. Something inside him, pride, pity, or maybe boredom, decided that this was a problem he would solve. He paced beneath the bare trees, tail twitching, mind spinning. How could he steal something as fierce as fire? How could he carry it down from the mountain without being burned to ash? The thought excited him. And perhaps that was a real reason he decided to try, because danger always called to him like music. For 3 days he watched the fire spirits from afar. They were tall, glowing figures, their hair bright as coals, their eyes like embers. They danced around their flame, laughing in a language of sparks. Every time they threw another log onto the fire, the sky above flickered red. Coyote crouched low in the shadows, his fur dusted with frost. "I'll just take a little," he whispered to himself. "Just enough to warm the people. They'll thank me, and maybe I'll be remembered." That was the thing about him. For all his mischief, Coyote always wanted to be loved. When the sun sank and the fire spirits settled to rest, he crept closer. Each step crackled softly beneath his paws. The air near the flame was thick with heat. It shimmered like a mirage. His nose twitched. His heart raced. The fire hissed, and for a moment he thought it spoke. "Go back," it seemed to whisper. "I burn what I touch." But Coyote only grinned. "Then I'll have to be faster than your fire," he said. With a swift leap, he darted forward, snatched a burning stick between his teeth, and ran. The fire spirits woke with a roar that shook the mountain. Their voices rose like thunder. "Thief! Trickster! The fire belongs to the gods." Coyote ran harder, his paws slicing through snow and rock. Behind him came the sound pursuit, the rush of hot wind, the glow of red light flooding the forest. Trees crackled and burst into flame as he passed. His fur began to smoke. The heat bit into his skin. Still he ran. Down the slopes he went, through icy streams that hissed as the fire kissed the water. The wind tore at his ears. His lungs burned with smoke. The stick in his mouth glowed brighter, shorter, smaller. Desperation bloomed in his chest. "No, no," he panted around the ember. "You won't die now. Not yet." Ahead, he saw a line of dark trees and the faint glimmer of the plains beyond. If he could just reach them, he thought, maybe he could pass the flame on. Maybe it would live. But the fire spirits were gaining. Their heat licked at his tail, their rage like a storm behind him. Coyote could feel his strength fading. Then, through the smoke, he saw them. A group of animals waiting in the valley. Squirrel, beaver, frog, and even the little hummingbird. They had been watching from afar, praying for his success. "Coyote!" Squirrel cried. "Give it here." With a final leap, he threw the burning stick toward her. It landed in her tail, setting it ablaze before she could turn. She screamed, but she ran up a tree, across a branch, leaping to another creature's paws. One by one, the animals carried it farther from the fire spirit's reach. Beaver dipped it into the water to cool it, then passed it to Frog, who swallowed a spark to keep it safe in his belly. Hummingbird caught a wisp of ember and carried it in her tiny beak across the plain, her wings a blur of courage. And when the fire spirits finally caught up, they found only a trail of smoke and laughter. The flame was gone. Coyote lay nearby, charred and trembling, his fur blackened, his body weak. His eyes fluttered open when the spirits towered over him. "Why?" they demanded. "You knew you would burn. You knew it was forbidden." Coyote coughed, a puff of smoke rising from his muzzle. Because, he said, his voice hoarse, the world was too cold for laughter. The fire spirits stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, their fury began to fade. Perhaps they saw something in him they hadn't expected. Not defiance, but devotion. Not arrogance, but love. Clumsy and wild. "Fool," one of them said softly. "Even a fool can change the world, if the world forgives his mistakes." With that, they turned and vanished into the sky, leaving behind a faint trail of glowing ash that drifted down like falling stars. When the people found Coyote the next morning, he was still smoking, still breathing. They gathered around him in awe. The animals came, too. Squirrel's tail still singed, frog's belly still warm, hummingbird's feathers shimmering with the last spark of fire. From that day, the people learned to make fire from wood and stone. They built hearths, cooked food, sang songs beside the glow. The cold nights no longer frightened them. The shadows became smaller, the laughter louder, and somewhere in the hills, Coyote watched it all, half proud and half embarrassed. His fur never grew back the same way. Patches of black remained where the fire had kissed him, but he didn't mind. They were reminders, proof that even he, the trickster, could do something good. He would sit on a ridge sometimes, watching the smoke rise from the villages below, wagging his tail just a little. Not bad, he'd say to himself. Not bad for a thief. Then, after a pause, he'd grin. Next time, though, I'll steal something bigger. Because that was Coyote's way. His heart could never stay still. Even when he did good, he did it by accident. But perhaps that was a lesson. Even a fool, given a moment of courage, can change everything. I imagine those first fires, the orange glow flickering against the faces of people who had never seen light before. The way their eyes must have widened, reflecting wonder and disbelief. The way laughter might have burst in their throats, warm and full, chasing the cold from their bones. That night, for the first time, the world felt alive. And though they may not have known it then, they owed it to a trickster, to a creature who risked everything, not for reward, but because he could not bear to see the world dark any longer. So when you sit beside a fire tonight, listen closely. Beneath the crackle, you might hear the echo of his running paws, the hiss of his breath, the wild beat of his heart. That is Coyote's song, the rhythm of foolish bravery and eternal curiosity. What would you risk to bring warmth to others? Tell me your thoughts below. Long before the night sky looked the way it does now, before the stars had scattered into their wide, glittering river, the heavens were nearly empty. Only a few pale lights drifted above the mountains. Slow, deliberate sparks placed one by the sky people. They worked with patience, whispering songs as they hung each star carefully in its proper place, a constellation for every creature, a guide for every traveler. It was beautiful work, but slow, too slow for someone like Coyote. He had been watching them for days, lying on his back in the cool sand, paws crossed behind his head. The air was cold enough to make his breath curl in little clouds. Above him, he saw the sky people moving across the darkness, tall, glimmering figures who shaped light the way potters shape clay. They sang quietly as they worked, their voices drifting down like silver dust. Coyote squinted, unimpressed. "Humph," he muttered. "At this rate, they'll finish by next winter." He rolled onto his side and watched them place another tiny star. Just one, then another. Each one twinkled politely before settling into its corner of the sky. The care they took made him restless. He pawed at the sand, wagged his tail, sighed dramatically. Patience was not a virtue he ever cared to practice. As the night grew colder, he wandered closer to the edge of the world, that thin horizon where earth and sky nearly touch. There at the feet of the sky people, he found baskets filled with stars. Each one shimmered faintly, like a firefly trapped in glass. He could hear them hum, soft, curious, alive. "Oh!" Coyote breathed, eyes widening. "So this is where you keep them." One of the sky people noticed him. "Be careful, Coyote," she warned gently. "These are not toys. They are the eyes of creation. Each one has a home to find." Coyote nodded solemnly. Of course. Wouldn't dream of touching them." He waited until she turned away, then grinned. His paws itched with temptation. The stars were so small, so light. He wondered what they would sound like if he tossed one into the sky himself. Would it sing? Would it dance? He reached into the basket, plucked one out, and threw it. The star sailed upward in a streak of white, landing with a bright shimmer among the others. Coyote barked in delight. "Well, that was easy," he said, tail wagging. "Why take all night?" He threw another, and another. Soon, the air sparkled with motion. Stars whizzing, tumbling, colliding softly with little ringing sounds like chimes in the wind. He laughed aloud, dancing in circles, his paws scattering sand. The sky people turned, startled. "Coyote! Stop!" they cried. But it was too late. The trickster had tipped over the entire basket. Thousands of stars poured out, rolling and tumbling upward in a wild, glittering storm. The sky burst open with light. Rivers of white, clusters of gold, streaks of blue so bright they made the mountains glow. The heavens, once so carefully ordered, exploded into chaos. Coyote froze, his laughter fading. "Oh," he whispered. "That wasn't supposed to happen." The sky people stood in silence, their faces glowing with the reflection of a new sky. For a long time, no one spoke. The wind howled softly through the canyons below, carried with it a new brightness, the faint shimmer of millions of stars burning in patterns no one had planned. Finally, one of the sky people sighed. "You fool," she said, though her voice was not angry. "You have ruined our work." Coyote hung his head. "I was only trying to help," he said. The sky woman looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps you did," she murmured. "For look, though you scattered them wildly, together they made a path across the heavens." Coyote followed her gaze. The stars had gathered themselves into a long, silver sweep, a river of light flowing from one end of the sky to the other. It shimmered with depth and motion, as if still remembering the hands that had thrown it. He tilted his head, his embarrassment fading into pride. "Well," he said, smiling slyly, "maybe I just have a different kind of creativity." The sky people shook their heads, but some of them smiled too. "You've made something new," one said quietly. "Something wild, something imperfect, and perhaps that is its own kind of beauty." Coyote wagged his tail. "See? I knew you'd like it." From that night on, the Milky Way shone above the desert. The trail of scattered stars, the mark of a trickster's impatience, turned to wonder. And if you looked closely enough, you could almost see the shape of his paw prints tracing the line across the sky. As for Coyote, he strutted around proudly for weeks. He would point to the heavens and boast, "See that? That's my work. Every single sparkle." He'd grin at the children of the tribes, their faces tilted upward in awe. "The sky people take forever," he'd say. "But I get things done." But not everyone was impressed. The elders shook their heads. He made the sky beautiful, they'd admit, but also crooked. That's how life is, part wisdom, part foolishness. You can't have one without the other. And so, when people looked up at the Milky Way, they remembered two things: the wonder creation and the danger of haste. Sometimes, I like to imagine that night, standing beside him on the ridge, feeling the cold wind on my face as the stars exploded across the sky. The light would have been dazzling, filling every shadow, turning the dark plains into a silver sea. The air would have hummed with energy, the sound of beginnings. There's something strangely comforting in knowing that even accidents can create beauty. That chaos, too, has its gifts. When I was a child, I thought the Milky Way was a river where the spirits walked, that each shimmer was a footprint of someone who came before us. Now I think perhaps it's both, a river of spirits and the path of one restless, reckless being who could never sit still. Coyote's impatience was his flaw, yes, but also his spark. Without it, the sky might still be empty. Without his foolishness, we might never have had something to wonder at. Sometimes when I look at the stars, I see him there still, darting from one constellation to another, stirring the dust, grinning as he rearranges the heavens just to see what happens. And maybe, just maybe, the universe laughs with him, because creation itself, I think, has a sense of humor. If you ever looked at the stars and felt small but alive, if you've ever wondered why beauty feels a little chaotic, a little wrong, then you've already understood Coyote's lesson. Perfection is quiet, chaos is alive, and life, for all its flaws, is meant to move, to shimmer, to surprise. The wind has picked up again tonight. It brushes against my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and ash. I look up, and the stars seem brighter than before, as though they, too, are remembering their wild beginning. I close my eyes and can almost hear the laughter of the sky people, mingling with Coyote's bark, echoing across the centuries. Their laughter isn't cruel. It's forgiving, the kind that welcomes imperfection as part of the design. And so, the stars still scatter where Coyote's paws once struck the sky. If this story made you look up tonight, let me know which star reminds you of him. The desert changes after nightfall. It becomes quieter, heavier, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. The wind no longer sings, it sighs. The stars lose their shimmer and turn cold. There's a certain kind of silence that feels alive in those hours, the kind that watches you more than you watch it. It was on such a night, they say, that coyote met the skull. He had been wandering for days, hungry and alone. His last meal was a lizard tail 2 suns ago, and even that hadn't filled him. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, gray sand, thorn bushes, bones of animals long gone. He had tricked so many creatures in his time that no one would share food with him anymore. Even the ravens ignored him. Bah! He muttered to himself as he walked. They think I'm greedy. They think I take too much. But what good is the world if you can't outsmart it? His stomach growled in reply. The sun had just slipped behind the mountains when he saw something glinting among the rocks. Curious, he patted closer. There, half buried in the sand, was a human skull, white and smooth, its hollow eyes staring at the horizon. Coyote tilted his head. Well, he said. What are you doing out here all alone, little head? The skull didn't answer. Of course it didn't. He sniffed it, circled it once, then laughed. You look lonely. Maybe I'll take you with me. You could use some company, and I could use someone who listens for a change. He picked it up carefully in his teeth and carried it along as the last light faded. After a while, though, something strange happened. A faint voice, dry and cracked like wind through leaves, whispered, "Why do you disturb my rest?" Coyote froze. The skull dangled from his mouth. He dropped it into the dust, eyes wide. Who said that? He barked. I did, said the skull. Its jaw did not move, but the voice came from within. I belonged to someone once. Now I belong to silence. Coyote stared at it, for prickling along his back. You can talk. Only when someone refuses to listen, said the skull. He blinked, confused. Well, I'm listening now. Are you? The question made him uneasy. He laughed to cover it up. Don't be so serious. Old bone. I'm just curious. How did you end up out here? Curiosity, the skull said, and hunger, the same things that lead you. Coyote frowned. What's that supposed to mean? But the skull only whispered, Leave me be. Now, anyone else might have listened, but Coyote was not anyone else. He was clever, proud, and far too stubborn to walk away from a mystery. He grinned. Oh no, my bony friend. You can't just start talking and then stop. You got to tell me your story. The skull sighed, a softness like sand shifting in the wind. You wouldn't understand. Try me, Coyote said. So the skull spoke. I was once a man, it said, a hunter who thought he was wiser than all others. I took what I wanted, boasted of my strength, ignored the voices that warned me to rest, to be grateful, to share. I laughed at the elders. I mocked the spirits. And when death came, I still laughed, because I thought even death could not take me. Coyote leaned closer. And could it? The skull's hollow eyes seemed to deepen. You see how I am. Coyote's tail flicked nervously. Well, I'm no fool like that, he said quickly. I may be mischievous, but I know how to survive. I always land on my feet. The skull was silent. Don't look at me like that. Coyote snapped. I'm not arrogant, just smart. There's a difference. Still, the skull said nothing. The silence pressed around him, heavy as stone. He nudged it with his paw. Say something. Nothing. Coyote growled. Fine. Be that way. I'll show you I'm not afraid. He grabbed the skull again and carried it through the darkness, determined to prove something, though he wasn't sure what. The desert stretched before him like an endless mirror. The stars hung low, cold and distant. Every sound, his breathing, his paws in sand, seemed too loud. As he walked, the voice came again. Why do you carry me? Coyote stopped. Because you might still have something to teach me, he said. Or maybe you'll bring me luck. Or maybe, whispered the skull, I'll bring you silence. He shivered. What do you mean? But the skull didn't answer. Coyote tried to laugh it off. You're just trying to scare me. I know you're kind, all riddles and no sense. He kept walking. Hours passed. The moon rose high, pale and thin. The wind grew colder. Coyote's paws began to ache. And still, the skull was quiet. At last, tired and frustrated, he stopped near a patch of dry grass. "Fine," he said, setting the skull down. "If you won't talk, I'll rest here. Maybe you'll have something clever to say in the morning." He lay beside it, curling his tail over his nose, and soon drifted into uneasy sleep. He dreamed of eyes, endless hollow eyes staring at him from the sand. Voices murmured all around, laughter without mouth, warnings without sound. He ran, but the ground crumbled beneath his feet. When he looked down, he saw it was made of skulls, thousands of them, whispering his name. He woke with a start. The desert was gray with dawn. His heart raced. He turned to where the skull had been. It was gone. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it all. But then he saw something glinting nearby, half buried in the sand again. He crept closer. It was a skull, resting exactly as before, hollow eyes staring at the horizon. Coyote swallowed hard. You came back." No answer. He nudged it. "Hey, I didn't mean to offend you." Still nothing. "Fine," he said, forcing a laugh. "Be silent, then. I've got better things to do." He turned to leave. Behind him, faint as wind, came a whisper. "So did I?" He froze. The words sank into him like cold water. Slowly, he turned back, but the skull was still lifeless once more. Something in him cracked then, not fear exactly, but understanding. He bowed his head. "You were right," he said softly. "I never listen." The desert wind rose, carrying sand over the skull, covering it grain by grain until it disappeared again. The world was silent. Coyote walked on. His hunger was still there, but it felt different now. Emptier, less urgent. He didn't feel clever anymore, just small. As the sun climbed, he looked at his reflection in a pool of still water. His eyes, once bright and mischievous, now looked weary. "Not every voice you hear should be answered," he murmured, "but every silence should be respected." He stayed there a long time, watching the ripples fade. Somewhere, far away, a crow called, sharp and distant, like a warning carried from another world. From that day forward, they say, Coyote walked the desert with quieter steps. He still played tricks, still laughed, but sometimes when the night grew too still, he would pause and listen. And in those pauses, when even the wind held its breath, he could almost hear it again, the faint whisper of skull beneath the sand, reminding him of the cost of arrogance, the danger of never listening. And maybe that's why, when you walk the desert at dusk, you should tread lightly, for the land remembers voices that defied silence, and it has a way of teaching those who don't listen. What do you think the skull was trying to say? I'd love to hear your reflection. Morning came soft and golden over the desert. The air was still cool, and the world smelled of sage and dew. Coyote trotted along a dusty trail, humming to himself, tail flicking in time to his own tune. He was in one of his cheerful moods, the kind that usually came just before trouble. As he walked, he spotted something bright fluttering ahead, a flash of color against the pale sand. Curious, he crept closer. There, perched on a smooth rock beside a clear blue spring, was Bluebird. Her feathers shimmered like the sky itself, a living piece of the morning. When she moved, light followed her, and when she sang, even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Coyote's mouth fell open. "Well now," he said, "that's unfair. How's a fellow supposed to compete with that?" Bluebird turned her head, amused. "Good morning, Coyote." "Morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "Lovely day, isn't it? The kind of day where one might want to sparkle a little." Sparkle? Bluebird tilted her head. "Oh, you know," he said, waving a paw. "Shine, glow, dazzle. The kind of thing you do so effortlessly." He gave a theatrical sigh. "I, on the other hand, am cursed with this dull coat, dust-colored, ordinary, invisible." Bluebird chuckled softly. "You? Invisible? I've never met anyone louder." Coyote grinned. "Flattery, but I suppose I can't blame you. It's hard not to admire me, even under all this brown." Bluebird ruffled her feathers. "It isn't flattery, Coyote. Everyone shines in their own way." But he barely heard her. His mind had already begun spinning. "Say, Bluebird," he said, eyes narrowing with curiosity, "how did you get feathers like that? Did you paint them? Trade with the spirits? Fall into a rainbow?" Bluebird laughed. No. Every morning, before the sun rises, I bathe in that spring. The water there is touched by the sky. It gives me my color." Coyote's ears perked up. "The water does that?" Bluebird nodded. "But it only works if your heart is light and your intentions are pure. It reflects what's inside." "Ah," Coyote said slowly, "reflects what's inside." He smiled, that sly, dangerous smile that meant mischief was on its way. Bluebird fluttered away to gather seeds, leaving him alone by the spring. He stared into the water. It was impossibly clear, the bottom glowing with little veins of turquoise stone. His reflection rippled gently. Long snout, bright eyes, coat the color of dust and smoke. He frowned. "Pure heart. Light intentions," he muttered. "How hard can that be?" He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and dipped one paw in. The water shimmered against his fur. Cool, soothing. For a moment he felt calm, peaceful. He imagined himself shining like Bluebird, his coat glowing in the morning sun. But patience was never Coyote's strong suit. "Why wait for morning?" he said. "Why stop at one paw?" He leapt into the spring with a splash that echoed through the valley. Water sprayed high into the air, drenching the rocks and scattering little ripples of light. He laughed, swirling and rolling, tail wagging. "Look at me now, Bluebird. I'll outshine the sky itself." He bathed and bathed, scrubbing his fur, tossing his head dramatically, shaking water everywhere. The spring surface glittered like 1,000 mirrors. But when he climbed out, dripping and proud, he froze. His reflection looked wrong. His coat wasn't blue. It wasn't glowing at all. It was gray, dull, muddy gray from head to tail. "What?" he gasped, spinning in circles. "This can't be right." Bluebird returned just in time to see him staring in horror at his reflection. She covered her beak to hide a smile. "Oh, dear," she said gently. "What happened to you?" Coyote glared at the water. "It lied to me. It made me worse." Bluebird perched on a nearby stone. "It didn't lie. The spring only shows what's inside. Perhaps you were too busy wanting to be someone else to see your own beauty." He scowled. "I just wanted to be magnificent." "You already were," she said softly. "In your own way." He blinked. "You're mocking me." "I'm not," she said. "You have clever eyes, quick paws, and a laugh that makes the hills echo. The spring gave what you carried. Your restlessness, your pride, your curiosity. Those are your colors, Coyote. Gray like smoke, like shadow, like the in-between places where stories live." Coyote's ears drooped. "So I'm doomed to be ordinary forever?" Bluebird smiled. "Nothing about you is ordinary. You just don't see it because you're always chasing what someone else has." He sat down, dripping, tail limp. The morning light touched the edge of his fur, and for a moment, even the gray shimmered, soft silver against the dawn. He caught sight of it and sighed. "Maybe gray isn't so bad," he said finally. "It's mysterious. Regal, even." Bluebird nodded. "Now you're starting to understand." Coyote stood and shook himself dry, spraying her with droplets. She laughed. "Be careful next time," she said. "The spring reflects honesty, not vanity. And perhaps that's the greater magic." Coyote grinned. "Oh, I've learned my lesson." But as soon as she flew off, he leaned over the water again, just to check. The same gray face looked back at him, and this time he thought it didn't look so bad after all. He wagged his tail. "Fine, I'll keep it. Let's call it distinguished." The wind carried his laughter across the desert, bright and foolish as always. But there was a softness to it now, too, a note of humility, perhaps even gratitude. As the sun rose higher, the spring caught the light and sparkled with 1,000 hues. Coyote squinted into it and thought of Bluebird's words. Maybe color wasn't what made something beautiful. Maybe beauty was how you moved through the world, how you laughed, how you kept going, how you found wonder even in what you already were. He trotted along the trail again, still humming, a little less loudly this time. The desert shimmered with heat. Shadows rippled like silk. He noticed, for the first time, how many shades of gray the world held. Soft silver on the rocks, pale gray in the clouds, deep charcoal in the mountain's bones. They were all beautiful in their own way. And perhaps that was the gift the spring had given him. Not color, but clarity. By the time he reached the next ridge, bluebird song floated faintly on the wind. He stopped to listen. It wasn't envy he felt anymore, but admiration. Gentle, easy, clean. Not bad for a little bird, he said fondly. But I think I'll stick with my own tune. He lifted his head and howled. Not a loud, proud howl, but a playful one, blending with the music of the morning. For once, it didn't matter who was brighter, faster, or finer. It was enough to be himself. He wanted to be beautiful, but forgot he already was. What's one thing about yourself you've learned to love again? There's a canyon I like to visit. Quiet, wind-carved, its walls painted in layers of red and gold. When the light slants just right, you can see centuries written in stone, the memory of oceans, the ghosts of rivers, the faint lines of ancient hands. The air there carries voices, though not in the way you might think. It hums, softly, as if the land itself remembers what people once said and refuses to forget. It was in that canyon years ago that I met her, an old woman wrapped in a faded blanket, her hair the color of the winter moon. She sat beside a small fire, tending a pot that smelled faintly of corn and sage. When she looked up, her eyes caught mine like twin embers. "You've come to listen," she said, though I hadn't spoken a word. I nodded and sat across from her. The air was cool, the kind that makes your breath visible, as if even your words must take shape before the desert will believe them. She smiled. "Then you came for Coyote." Her voice was low and musical, worn smooth by years of telling. I felt the rhythm of it before the meaning. The rise and fall, the pauses where silence spoke too. She didn't tell the stories like someone recalling the past. She told them like someone invoking a spirit that was still alive. She began with laughter, not solemnity. "Ah, that foolish one," she said. "Always hungry, always clever, never satisfied." The lines on her face deepened as she chuckled. "He's still out there, you know, running circles around those who think they can outsmart him." We talked until the stars came out, the fire shrinking to coals. The canyon walls held her voice and threw it back in gentle echoes. She told me how, long ago, when her grandmother was a child, stories were forbidden, not by nature, not by spirits, but by people. They came with books and laws, she said, her eyes reflecting the fire. Said our words were savage. Said our children needed to learn theirs instead. They built schools where laughter was punished, and our songs were silenced. Her voice faltered then, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. The canyon wind filled the pause, sighing through the rocks like a chorus of ancestors. "But Coyote," she continued softly, "he was too sly to die. Even when they tried to erase him, he found his way back. In whispers, in jokes, in dreams. You can't bury laughter. It just hides for a while." She told me how mothers would tell the children Coyote's tales while pretending to teach something else. How they would speak half in English, half in their own tongue, so the meaning stayed alive even if the words had to change. How the children, forced to speak the new language at school, would still giggle in secret, retelling the stories in shadows, hiding them like precious seeds. Stories were how we remembered who we were, she said. When they took everything else, the story stayed. We fed them with laughter. We kept them warm. Her words settled over me like the dust that rises at dusk. Quiet, patient, inevitable. I thought of all those stories told in secret, of laughter trembling in fear and still finding its way into the air. I thought of how fragile a voice can be and how strong, too, when it carries truth. Do you still tell them? I asked. She smiled again, slow and sure. Every chance I get. You can't let Coyote grow bored. He needs an audience. He needs to see that we remember. She reached into the fire with a stick and stirred the coals. The flames flared, painting her face in gold and shadow. You know, he taught us more than mischief. He taught us how to live through foolish times, how to laugh when the world wants tears. Her laughter, when it came again, was soft but steady. When the soldiers came, when the priests came, when the teachers came with their rules and punishments, we still laughed. That's what saved us. The tricksters' laughter. They thought they could shame us into silence. But shame doesn't survive laughter. I remember that line more clearly than any other. Shame doesn't survive laughter. The night deepened and the stars thickened overhead, bright, infinite, like the eyes of old spirits watching. She told me that each star carried a story, that when people forgot one, it dimmed. I looked up and wondered how many stories were gone already, and how many were waiting to return. "Will you tell it?" she asked suddenly. "Tell what?" "His story. The one that keeps him alive. The one that keeps us alive." Her gaze was steady, unblinking. I nodded. "I will." She leaned back, satisfied, and looked toward the horizon where the canyon opened into night. "Good," she said, "because someday the world will need him again, the one who reminds us that laughter is sacred and mistakes are part of the dance." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind play along the canyon walls. It made a low, mournful sound, almost like a flute. I realized it wasn't empty noise. It was the sound of old words, still circling, still refusing to die. Before I left, she handed me a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For your journey," she said. Inside was a smooth stone painted with a paw print, Coyote's mark. "Carry it," she said, "and remember that even silence speaks." When I looked up from the bundle, she was smiling, but her eyes had drifted far away, into some place only she could see, maybe a place made of stories, where Coyote still runs laughing beside the ancestors. Now, whenever I return to that canyon, I stop by the same fire ring. The ashes are cold, but the air still hums. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear her voice rise again, telling the trickster who never stayed buried, who always found a way to return. Stories were once banned, but even silence could not erase the trickster's laughter. And if this move you, take a moment to honor the storytellers who kept their words alive, the women who whisper by firelight, the children who giggled in the dark, and the elders whose voices built bridges between what was lost and what remains. Because as long as a single story survives, Coyote will keep running, and the world will never be entirely silent. The fire has burned low again. Only a few orange coals remain, pulsing softly in the dark like a heartbeat. I sit before them, the chill creeping close, and think about everything Coyote has done, the foolishness, the laughter, the trouble, the lessons. And somehow, despite all his mistakes, I can't help but feel grateful for him, because beneath all the mischief and noise, he has always been a mirror. When you stare into a fire long enough, it begins to show you things. Not visions exactly, but reflections, the shape of your own thoughts, flickering and uncertain. I think Coyote lives in that kind of reflection. He shows us ourselves, not as we wish to be, but as we are, stubborn, curious, foolish, beautiful in our imperfection. In every one of his stories, he blunders. He chases something shiny and falls into trouble. He mocks the powerful. He questions the rules. He acts without thinking. Yet somehow, through all that chaos, the world grows a little more alive. Rivers find their course. Fire warms the people. Stars fill the sky. Even his mistakes have meaning. Maybe that's the secret. That creation itself depends on imperfection. Long ago, the elders said Coyote was put here to remind us that we are still learning. That every error, every fall, every embarrassing moment of pride is part of a greater rhythm. We are born knowing nothing. We stumble, we fail, and we rise again, each time carrying a bit more light. And isn't that what living truly is? A dance between wisdom and folly, between knowing better and doing it anyway? I think about how often we scold ourselves for our mistakes, how quickly we forget that all wisdom grows from them. When we laugh at Coyote, maybe we're also laughing at our own reflection, forgiving it just a little. The elders used to say that laughter is medicine. not the kind that cures the body, but the kind that mends the spirit. It loosens the heavy knots of shame. It turns guilt into understanding. That's what Coyote teaches us most of all. Not to be perfect, but to forgive ourselves for being human. He's not a saint, not a villain, not even a hero. He's simply the reminder that learning is messy, that life isn't a straight road, but a wandering path full of detours and surprises. I remember something the old woman in the canyon once said, "Coyote is not the opposite of wisdom. He is its beginning." Those words have followed me ever since. Because if we could only love the part of ourselves that learns the hard way, maybe the world would be gentler. Maybe we'd speak to one another with more patience. Maybe we'd listen more deeply, knowing that everyone carries their own kind of coyote, the restless, unpolished spirit that keeps searching for meaning even in mistakes. When I think of him now, I don't see a trickster running through the desert. I see that spark inside each of us, the urge to question, to explore, to reach too far. It's the same impulse that drives us to make art, to seek connection, to fall in love, to try again after failure. It's foolish hope, yes, but it's also divine. Maybe that's why Coyote never dies, because neither does our foolish hope. You can bury it under cynicism or star it with regret, but it will still twitch back to life when you least expect it. The human heart has a strange resilience. It insists on another sunrise, another story, another chance. And so Coyote runs on, across the sands of time through laughter and grief alike. He keeps teaching us what it means to be alive. Sometimes, when I watch people sitting quietly around a campfire, I think about how we've always gathered this way, even before memory began. Firelight softens faces, erases walls between strangers. It makes us honest. The shadows that flicker behind us are our ancestors, and the reflections in the flame are our dreams. In that gentle glow, you can almost hear the echoes of every storyteller who ever lived, whispering lessons wrapped in laughter. I imagine one of those storytellers pausing between words, looking at their audience and saying softly, "Don't be afraid of your mistakes." Even the trickster's tracks lead home. Coyote stories aren't there to frighten us into obedience. They're there to remind us that life is never finished, that every time we fail, we create space for something new to grow. He teaches humility, not through rules, but through experience. He makes us laugh so we can breathe again after sorrow. And in his laughter, there's always compassion. He forgives himself instantly, without question. That's something we humans rarely do. We carry our failures like stones in our pockets, weighing ourselves down long after the lesson has been learned. But Coyote doesn't. He shakes it off, smiles, and runs on. Maybe that's the truest wisdom of all, to keep moving, to keep laughing, to keep forgiving. I look into the fire again and see my own reflection shimmer. The lines of my face blend with the shadows of the flame, just as Coyote's have blended with ours over time. I wonder how many people before me sat like this, thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same quiet gratitude for the stories that keep us human. Outside, the night is still and vast. Somewhere an owl calls, and the stars flicker like sparks scattered from a divine hearth. I like to think each star is a story Coyote once tossed into the heavens, some of them bright and bold, others dim and half forgotten, but all of them part of the same great pattern. That's what we are too, tiny lights flickering in the endless dark, each carrying a bit of warmth, a bit of laughter, a bit of hope. When you think about it that way, it's easier to forgive, to look at your younger self and smile instead of scold, to see your own Coyote messy, curious, impossible, and say, "You tried, you learned, you're still here," and maybe that's enough. The firelight has nearly faded now, but I don't mind. The dark feels softer somehow, as if it's listening. In the silence, I can almost hear a faint laugh echoing across the desert. Not mocking, but tender. It sounds like understanding. It sounds like love. If this thought brought you calm, share it with someone who forgets how to forgive themselves. The desert is quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that holds its breath before dawn. The stars hang low and still, and the wind moves like a whisper among the rocks. It is said that on nights like this, when the world feels thin and time slows its heartbeat, you can hear Coyote's laughter in the distance. Faint, playful, lingering somewhere between life and whatever lies beyond it. This is the story of his last trick. It began, as so many of his adventures did, with mischief. Coyote had grown older by then. His fur was rougher, his steps slower, but his eyes still gleamed with that restless fire. He had seen much: the birth of rivers, the rise of mountains, the endless cycle of day and night. But there was one thing he hadn't yet outsmarted: death. He had watched others go: the bear into the cave of forever sleep, the raven into the dark sky, the deer into the wind. Each time he wondered, where do they go? What happens after the story ends? The thought gnawed at him. He did not like mysteries he couldn't unravel. So one evening, as the sun melted behind the cliffs and the shadows stretched long, Coyote decided to play one final trick. "I'll trick death," he said aloud, grinning. "I'll pretend to die, and when he comes to take me, I'll leap up and laugh in his face. Then I'll know what he looks like." He found a hollow near a dry riverbed, laid down upon the sand, and closed his eyes. He slowed his breathing until even the crickets grew silent. Thinking he was gone, his tail rested still. His heart thudded softly. The desert waited. After a long time, a coolness passed over him. Not the ordinary cool of night, but something deeper, older, the kind that smelled of stone and rain and endings. A shadow fell across his body. "So," said a voice, calm and patient, "you're ready at last." Coyote almost opened one eye, but caught himself. Not yet, he thought. Let's see how this plays out. The figure of death leaned closer. Not a monster, not a skeleton, just a presence, like the hush before a storm. "You've been running a long time, little one," it said gently. "It's time to rest." Coyote couldn't help himself. He snorted. "Rest? Me? I've barely started." Death didn't flinch. Then why pretend? Coyote opened his eyes, grinning. "I wanted to see your face." Death chuckled, a sound like sand slipping down a dune. "And now that you've seen it?" "Well," Coyote said, sitting up, brushing dust from his fur, "you're not nearly as frightening as they say." "I never am," Death replied. "Only those who don't listen think I'm cruel." Coyote tilted his head. "Then what are you if not cruel?" "I'm balance," Death said, the pause between songs, the quiet after laughter. Coyote frowned. "But what if I don't want a song to end?" "Then it won't," Death said softly. "It will just change tune." For a moment, Coyote was silent. The wind stirred the dry grass. The moon rose higher, silvering the edges of the world. Finally, he said, "You talk pretty for someone whose job is to end things." Death smiled. "Or maybe the air just grew a little warmer. I don't end things, Trickster. I remind them they were never separate. Every story returns to the one who told it. Every spark finds its way back to the fire." Coyote's grin faltered, just slightly. "So, you mean I'll go back to the beginning?" "In a way," said Death. "Back to the wind, the laughter, the stories told about you. You'll never be gone, only changed." Coyote looked up at the stars, the great river of light he'd once scattered long ago. "You promise?" he asked quietly. "I never lie," said Death. Coyote thought for a long while. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but one more trick first." Death tilted its head. "Another?" "Just one." Coyote's grin returned, bright as moonlight. "Pretend you didn't catch me. Let me go running one more time. Let the people think I'm still out here, laughing. They'll tell stories about it, and maybe they'll remember that even endings can be funny." Death chuckled again. "I can allow that." And so Coyote stood, stretched, and shook the dust from his coat. He looked around the desert one last time. The stones, the stars, the thin thread of the horizon. Then, without a sound, he started to run. He ran faster than wind, faster than thought, faster than sorrow. His paws barely touched the earth. The night followed behind him in silver ripples. And when the dawn came, the people found only his footprints, leading toward the rising sun. They say Death watched him go and laughed softly. "Even now, he thinks he's escaped me," it said. "But maybe he has. Maybe laughter is a kind of immortality." From that day on, the people told it differently. Some said Coyote never died at all, that he turned into wind, forever whispering across the plains. Others said he became the morning star, guiding travelers through the dark. And some believed he lived inside their dreams, appearing whenever they needed reminding that trouble, too, has its lessons. I think all those stories are true, because even now, when I walk through the desert and the wind brushes my ear just so, I swear I hear him, that sly, joyful bark in the distance. It carries no sadness, no regret, only the rhythm of someone who knows that life never truly ends. It only shifts shape. Death laughed, but so did Coyote, and that was enough. If you ever lost someone but still feel them in small moments, a scent in the air, a laugh that echoes, a warmth that comes from nowhere, then you know what he discovered. Love and memory don't vanish. They simply change their form, just as he did. Some nights, I sit again by the fire and feel that familiar presence in the wind. I tell his stories, the foolish ones, the brave ones, the ones that make people laugh through tears. And every time the fire cracks or the flame flares, I imagine him there, grinning, whispering, "Tell it right, storyteller. Don't make me sound too wise." And I laugh, because I can almost hear the echo of his footsteps running into eternity. The eternal trickster, still chasing the horizon, still teaching us how to live by never truly dying. So when the fire dims and the night grows deep, I don't say goodbye. I just look to the stars, his stars, and whisper, "Run well, old friend," because somewhere out there beyond time and shadow, I know he still is. If you've ever lost someone but still feel them in small moments, this story was for you. The fire is small now, just a faint glow of coals breathing in the ashes. The night has grown pale at the edges, a soft silver hint that morning isn't far away. The air has changed too. It's no longer heavy with mystery, but gentle, like an old song coming to its end. I draw my blanket closer and look toward the horizon, where the first touch of light folds itself around the sleeping desert. It has been a long night of stories, laughter, lessons, foolishness, and quiet reflection. The kind of night where words feel sacred, as if each one builds a bridge between the living and the long gone. And now, as the fire hums its final lullaby, I think of all the voices that carried Coyote's tales before mine. The elders, the wanderers, the mothers whispering to their children under the stars. I am just another in a long, unbroken chain. The desert feels older than time this morning. The rocks, cold beneath the fading moon, seem to watch patiently as the first light creeps down the canyon walls. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls, one last echo before the day begins. In that quiet, I can still hear the memory of laughter, not loud or mocking, but warm and knowing, the kind that stays with you after the story ends. That's how it is with Coyote. He never truly leaves. He lingers in the stillness after the fire, in the sigh of the wind through the sagebrush, in the shimmer of stars that refuse to fade. Every storyteller who speaks his name calls him back, if only for a moment. And perhaps that's what immortality really means. Not eternal life, but eternal remembrance. I think back to the beginning of the night, when I first spoke his name beneath this same sky. I remember how the fire burned bright then, how the wind seemed to listen. I didn't know, when I began, that telling his stories would feel like looking into a mirror, not at my face, but the human spirit itself, all its contradictions, all its light and shadow. Coyote is the restless part of us that refuses to stay still, the one who questions, who dreams, who risks, who learned by falling again and again. And even now, I find comfort in him, in his foolish courage, in his endless curiosity, in the way he reminds us that imperfection is not a flaw but a sign of life. The sky above is shifting from indigo to pale blue. The stars are retreating, though one or two stubbornly linger, shining faintly as if unwilling to leave the conversation. Maybe they're listening too. Maybe they know that every story told beneath them feeds their light, that somewhere laughter is fuel for the universe. I reach out and stir the last of the coals. They flare briefly, throwing a burst of orange onto my hands. For an instant, I see the shimmer of all the tales we shared tonight. Fire stolen from the gods, stars flung across the heavens, lessons whispered by skulls, the gleam of bluebirds' wings, the echo of the elders' laughter in the canyon, and finally, the quiet smile of death when Coyote tricked him just enough to stay alive in our memories. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the fire settles again. The desert smells of ash and sage. the kind of scent that feels like both ending and beginning. I think about how fragile stories are, made of nothing but breath and sound, and yet how they outlive mountains. How something so small can carry love, wisdom, and laughter across centuries. That's why we tell them, not just to remember, but to belong. When I was a child, I used to think stories were only about heroes and gods, distant things that didn't touch the world I lived in. But as I've grown older, I see that every story is a heartbeat, a reminder that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. Every listener becomes a keeper. Every word passed on becomes a thread in the great tapestry of memory. Maybe that's why storytelling feels sacred, because when you listen, truly listen, you give the story a home. You become the next flame in a long chain of firelight. I look around at the fading stars and smile. Somewhere out there, beyond sight, another storyteller is probably doing the same, tending their own small fire. Speaking of Coyote, keeping the laughter alive. And when they finish, another will begin. Coyote is not gone. He's just waiting for the next storyteller. The thought makes me feel peaceful, because as long as someone somewhere remembers him, or remembers what he represents, the world will never lose its spark. The first light of dawn spills across the sand now, soft and golden. The canyon walls turn the color of copper. The shadows draw back like a tide. I can feel warmth touching my face again. The night has given everything it had. Stories, silence, reflection, and now it offers the world back to the day. I gather the last embers together, letting them glow for a few final breaths before they fade into smoke. The air shivers with the faintest sigh, a reminder that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. Somewhere in that shifting air, I think I hear it, a faint, familiar chuckle carried on the wind. Coyote laughing again, not loudly, not mockingly, but softly, as if amused that anyone ever thought he could disappear. I laugh too, quietly. You win again, old friend. I whisper, you always do. The desert accepts my voice, absorbs it, carries it away. The sky brightens completely now, washing the stars from sight. The sun lifts itself over the ridge, slow and certain. Light touches the ashes of the fire, turning them silver. The world feels new again. I stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness of sitting too long, and brush the dust from my hands. My blanket still smells faintly of smoke and stories. I think of all the listeners who might hear these words after me, across distances I'll never see, in languages I'll never speak, and I feel an unexpected swell of gratitude, because that's the real miracle of storytelling, that it survives the teller, that it moves from one heart to another like a spark finding new kindling. As I turn to leave, I pause and glance back at the small circle of ash. It's almost invisible now, but I know that under the sand, the warmth lingers. The next traveler who stops here might feel it, might light their own fire from the same spot. And when they do, maybe they'll tell the same stories, or new ones built from the old. Maybe they'll whisper Coyote's name into the dark and hear him laugh and reply. And so, in that way, the fire never really goes out. It travels from flame to flame, from heart to heart, from story to story, lighting the path for those who come after. If this story brought you calm or curiosity, let it travel. Share it so someone else may dream beside the same fire.